You don't repeat mistakes because you're weak. You repeat them because something inside you still believes the mistake is useful. That's the part nobody wants to admit. You tell yourself, I didn't know better, or I just slipped up. But deep down, your mind made a quiet agreement. This behavior gives me something I'm not getting elsewhere. Maybe it gives you comfort. Maybe it gives you control. Maybe it gives you a temporary escape from pressure. But whatever it is, it's enough to override logic. This is the dark truth Stoicism forces you to face. You are not ruled by what is right. You are ruled by what feels necessary in the moment. And until you expose what that necessity is, you will keep walking straight back into the same fire, pretending each burn is a surprise. Most people think mistakes happen because of lack of discipline, but that's only the surface. The deeper cause is emotional negotiation. Every time you repeat a mistake, your mind is quietly weighing two things: short-term relief versus long-term consequence. And almost every time, relief wins. Not because you're incapable of choosing better, but because you haven't trained yourself to sit inside discomfort long enough to let it pass. Stoics understood this clearly. What we call failure is often just impatience with discomfort. You don't go back to what hurts you because you love pain. You go back because for a brief moment, it removes a different kind of pain: boredom, loneliness, uncertainty, self-doubt. So the mistake becomes a trade. You sacrifice your future clarity for present comfort, again and again, until the pattern feels like identity. There's also something more unsettling happening beneath that. Your brain is trying to protect a version of you that no longer serves you. Every repeated mistake reinforces a familiar identity: the one who procrastinates, the one who chooses the wrong people, the one who avoids hard decisions. As long as you repeat the pattern, you don't have to face the unknown version of yourself that might demand more responsibility, more courage, more change. And that's terrifying, so your mind keeps pulling you back into what you already know, even if it's painful. The Stoics believed that most suffering comes not from events, but from our attachment to familiar patterns. You're not just repeating a mistake, you're preserving a version of yourself that feels safe, even if it's limiting. Another reason you stay stuck is because you mistake awareness for change. You notice the pattern, you even predict it, and that gives you a false sense of control. You think, at least I know what I'm doing wrong, as if awareness alone earns you progress. But awareness without action is just observation. It doesn't break anything. In fact, it can make the cycle worse, because now you carry guilt on top of repetition. The Stoic mindset is brutally simple. If you see the problem and do nothing, you are choosing it. There is no middle ground. And that's where most people get trapped. They want the insight without the responsibility that comes with it. Then there's the role of delayed consequences. Most of your mistakes don't punish you immediately. The cost shows up later, hours later, days later, sometimes years later. That delay creates a dangerous illusion. It makes the mistake feel harmless in the moment. You can ignore the long-term impact because it's not standing in front of you right now. But Stoicism teaches that time does not erase consequences. It collects them. Every repeated mistake is like stacking weight on your future self, and eventually that weight becomes too heavy to carry. The problem is, by the time you feel it, the pattern is already deeply rooted. You also keep repeating mistakes because you underestimate how powerful your environment is. You think it's all about willpower, but willpower is fragile when it's constantly tested. If you stay in the same surroundings, around the same triggers, with the same routines, you are setting yourself up to fail again. The Stoics were very aware of this. They didn't just focus on internal discipline, they also controlled what they exposed themselves to. If something consistently pulls you toward bad decisions, staying in that environment while expecting different results isn't strength. It's self-sabotage disguised as resilience. And then there's pride, the quiet force that keeps you stuck longer than anything else. Pride makes you defend your mistakes instead of dissecting them. It whispers, "It wasn't that bad," or "I had my reasons," or "I'll handle it next time." But next time becomes the same time, over and over again. Pride hates admitting that change requires humility, that you might need to rethink how you make decisions, who you trust, or how you handle emotions. Stoicism, at its core, is about removing that ego shield and facing yourself without excuses. And most people avoid that, because it's easier to repeat a mistake than to admit you've been the cause of it all along. What makes this cycle even stronger is the way your mind normalizes repetition. The more you do something, the less resistance you feel toward it. What once felt wrong starts to feel familiar, and what feels familiar starts to feel acceptable. That's how patterns become habits, and habits become identity. You stop questioning the behavior because it no longer shocks you. It becomes part of your routine, something you just do. And once a mistake reaches that level, breaking it requires more than awareness. It requires a complete interruption of your normal behavior, something most people avoid because it feels uncomfortable and unnatural. You also carry invisible scripts from your past, beliefs you never consciously chose. Maybe you grew up thinking struggle is normal, or that you don't deserve better, or that things always go wrong eventually. These quiet beliefs shape your decisions in ways you don't even notice. So when a situation arises, you unconsciously act in alignment with that script, even if it leads to another mistake. The Stoics emphasized examining your thoughts because they knew that unchallenged beliefs quietly control your actions. If you don't question those internal scripts, you will keep replaying them in real life, over and over again. And finally, there's a hard truth most people don't want to hear. You might not actually hate the outcome as much as you say you do. If the consequences were truly unbearable, you would stop. But somewhere inside, you've made peace with the cost. You've accepted it as part of your life. That acceptance removes the urgency to change. Stoicism challenges this directly. It forces you to ask, are you truly suffering, or have you just grown comfortable with a lower standard for your life? Because once you accept something as just the way it is, you stop fighting against it, and the mistake becomes permanent. The real trap isn't the mistake itself. It's the system of thoughts, emotions, and justifications that keep leading you back to it. And until you dismantle that system piece by piece, no amount of motivation, discipline, or temporary effort will save you from repeating it again. What most people never realize is that breaking a pattern doesn't start with stopping the behavior. It starts with interrupting the moment right before it happens. That tiny window, the few seconds where you feel the urge building, is where everything is decided. But that moment is uncomfortable, almost unbearable, because it forces you to sit face to face with yourself without distraction. So instead of pausing, you move quickly. You act, you react, you distract, you repeat. The Stoics trained themselves to slow that moment down, to stretch it, to observe it. Because once you can sit inside that urge without obeying it, you begin to separate yourself from it. You stop being controlled by impulse and start becoming aware of it. And awareness in that moment, not after the mistake but before it, is where real control begins. There's also a deeper layer to this. Your mind is constantly trying to maintain consistency with your past actions. It doesn't like contradiction. So if you've been someone who repeats a certain mistake, your brain subtly pushes you to keep doing it, just to stay consistent with who you've been. Changing your behavior feels like breaking your own identity, and that creates internal resistance. That's why improvement often feels unnatural at first. It's not because it's wrong, it's because it's unfamiliar. Stoicism teaches that you are not your past actions unless you continue to repeat them. The moment you choose differently, you begin rewriting that identity. But in the beginning, that choice will feel forced, almost like you're acting against yourself. Because in a way, you are. Another reason the cycle continues is because you rely too much on motivation and not enough on structure. You wait until you feel ready to change, until you feel strong enough, disciplined enough, clear enough. But feelings are unreliable. They come and go. If your behavior depends on how you feel, then your mistakes will return every time your emotions dip. The Stoics didn't rely on feelings. They relied on systems. They built routines, boundaries, and rules that guided their actions regardless of mood, because they understood something powerful. Discipline is not about intensity, it's about consistency, and consistency is built through structure, not emotion. You also have to confront how you talk to yourself after you make a mistake. Most people swing between two extremes. They either beat themselves up harshly or they excuse themselves too easily. Both are dangerous. Harsh self-judgment creates shame, and shame often leads right back into the same behavior as a form of escape. On the other hand, constant self-excusing removes accountability, making it easier to repeat the mistake without resistance. Stoicism offers a different path, honest evaluation without emotional drama. You look at what happened, you identify where you failed, and you adjust. No self-pity, no self-hate, just clarity. Because the goal isn't to feel bad about the mistake, the goal is to understand it so deeply that it loses its power over you. Then there's the illusion of one last time. This is one of the most dangerous thoughts you can have. You tell yourself, this is the last time I'll do this, as if making that promise somehow changes the outcome. But it doesn't. In fact, it often makes the behavior easier to justify because you've already framed it as temporary. The Stoics would call this self-deception. You're negotiating with a habit that has already proven it doesn't respect your promises. Real change doesn't come from declaring last times. It comes from making a different choice in real time, without drama, without announcements, without waiting for the perfect moment. Another hidden trap is comparison. You look at others who seem to have broken their patterns, who seem more disciplined, more focused, more in control, and instead of using that as inspiration, it quietly discourages you. You start thinking, maybe I'm just not built like that, or maybe it's easier for them. That belief becomes an excuse, and excuses protect patterns. Stoicism rejects comparison entirely. It focuses only on your actions, your choices, your progress. Because the moment you make your growth dependent on how you measure up to others, you lose control over it. You also underestimate how much repetition has trained your brain. Every time you repeat a mistake, you strengthen the pathway that leads to it. It becomes quicker, easier, more automatic. That's why it feels like you're falling into it without thinking. And in a way you are, because your brain has been trained to go there. But the same principle works in reverse. Every time you interrupt that pattern, even once, you weaken it. It might not feel like much in the moment, but over time, those interruptions build a new pathway. Stoicism is about understanding that change is not a single decision. It's a series of small, repeated interruptions of the old self. And here's something even deeper. Many people repeat mistakes because they don't fully accept responsibility for their choices. Not in a surface-level way, but in a complete, undeniable way. They still leave room for blame, on circumstances, on other people, on stress, on timing. And as long as there's blame, there's an escape. Because if something else is responsible, then you don't have to fully change. The Stoics removed that escape completely. They believed that while you cannot control everything that happens to you, you are always responsible for how you respond. That level of ownership is uncomfortable, but it's also freeing, because it means the power to change is entirely in your hands. Finally, you have to face the fact that change is not just about removing a mistake. It's about replacing it. If you take away a behavior that once gave you comfort, control, or escape, and you don't replace it with something stronger, your mind will pull you back to what it knows. That's why so many people relapse into old patterns. They create a void, but don't fill it. Stoicism teaches that discipline isn't just about avoidance, it's about redirection. You don't just stop the behavior, you replace it with something that aligns with the person you're trying to become. And this is where the real work begins, not in recognizing the mistake, not in promising to change, but in building a new version of yourself that no longer needs that mistake to cope, to escape, or to feel in control. Because once that version of you becomes stronger than the one tied to the pattern, repetition no longer feels natural, and for the first time, the cycle begins to break. The truth is, you were never stuck because you didn't know better. You were stuck because a part of you kept choosing what was familiar over what was right. And once you see that clearly, everything changes. Because now it's no longer about bad luck or timing or circumstances. It's about ownership. Every repeated mistake was a decision, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. And that might sound harsh, but it's actually the most empowering realization you can have. Because if your choices created the pattern, then your choices can break it. Not tomorrow, not someday, but in the exact moment the urge shows up again. The Stoic path isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming aware enough to interrupt yourself in real time. It's about catching that split second where you normally fall back into the same behavior and choosing something different, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels unnatural. That's where growth actually happens, not in motivation, not in promises, but in those quiet, difficult decisions no one else sees. And the more you choose differently in those moments, the more you prove to yourself that you are not your past patterns. You are your present actions. So the next time you feel that pull toward the same mistake, don't rush past it. Pause. Sit in it. Recognize it for what it is, a test of whether you're going to stay the same or finally move forward. Because the cycle doesn't break all at once, it breaks the moment you decide that temporary comfort is no longer worth long-term regret. And if this message hits something real for you, if you're ready to stop repeating the same patterns and start taking control of your decisions, make sure you subscribe to PsychoVest, because this is where we break down the truths most people avoid and turn them into real, practical power you can use in your everyday life. Drop a comment below and be honest. What's one mistake you're done repeating starting today?